The studio lights were barely warming up when the tension snapped into focus, that strange, electric hush that settles over a room just before something goes wrong. Samuel L. Jackson sat tall in his chair, suit sharp, posture relaxed but alert, like a man who'd spent a lifetime reading rooms before they ever read him. Across from him, Michael Strahan leaned forward with his familiar, easy grin, the kind that had carried him from football fields to morning television with remarkable grace. The opening minutes flowed exactly as planned, film clips rolling on the monitors, laughter punctuating the scripted beats, applause rising on cue. To anyone watching at home, it was just another polished segment of Good Morning America. But there was a subtle shift, almost invisible, when the conversation veered off its safe path. It began with a joke about Jackson's reputation for intensity, delivered lightly, the kind of comment meant to tease rather than provoke. Jackson chuckled, shaking his head, playing along. He'd done this dance countless times before. He knew how morning shows worked. Keep it breezy, keep it accessible, keep it moving. The audience laughed, relieved, and the producers behind the cameras relaxed, just a notch. Then Strahan followed up with a question that sounded harmless on paper but carried a familiar sting. He talked about dialing it back, about how some audiences found Jackson's style a little much, about whether the actor ever thought of softening his edge to stay palatable. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Jackson's smile didn't vanish, but it changed, tightening at the corners. His eyes, moments ago warm, sharpened with focus. For a heartbeat, it seemed like he might deflect, toss out a witty line and move on. Instead, he paused. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and raw, cutting through the studio's practiced rhythm. Jackson leaned back slightly, hands folding together, and answered slowly, deliberately. He spoke about authenticity, about not sanding down who you are to make others comfortable. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was weight behind every syllable. The audience laughed again, softer this time, unsure whether they were laughing with him or at the situation itself. Strahan nodded, trying to keep the energy light, but pressed again, just a little, asking whether there was a responsibility to meet viewers halfway. That was when the air changed completely. Jackson leaned forward now, elbows resting on his knees, gaze fixed squarely on Strahan. The cameras caught the intensity, zooming in without meaning to, drawn to the gravity of the moment. Jackson spoke about respect, about the difference between conversation and condescension, about how often he'd been asked to explain himself in ways others never were. Behind the scenes, producers began to shift. A hand went up, signaling the control room. Someone whispered into a headset. The teleprompter operator froze, unsure whether to roll forward or wait. This wasn't in the rundown. Strahan attempted to pivot, offering a conciliatory smile, but Jackson wasn't finished. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't gesturing wildly. That, perhaps, made it more unsettling. His tone remained steady, but his words carried a sharp clarity that cut through the studio chatter. He talked about being labeled difficult for refusing to be smaller, quieter, easier. He talked about how those labels followed people like him no matter how many accolades they earned. The audience had gone completely silent now. No laughter, no murmurs, just the faint hum of equipment and the distant rustle of cue cards. Even the band, usually ready to jump in with a playful sting, stayed frozen. Strahan's smile faded into something more cautious, his hands lifting slightly in a gesture meant to calm, to reassure, to regain control of the segment. He apologized if the question came off the wrong way, but the apology landed awkwardly, tangled in explanation. Jackson straightened in his chair, adjusting his jacket with deliberate precision. The gesture was small, but it carried the unmistakable signal of finality. He said he'd come to talk about his work, not to defend his existence or soften himself for morning television. He said he respected the platform, but respect had to run both ways. His voice never rose, yet every word echoed. The control room made the call. A floor manager stepped closer, just out of frame, ready to intervene. The red light on the camera blinked, signaling an impending cut. Jackson stood, smooth and unhurried, towering slightly over the seated host. He thanked the audience, nodding once, and said he was done with the conversation. For a split second, it looked like Strahan might stand too, might salvage the moment with a handshake or a joke. But the momentum had already shifted. Security appeared at the edge of the set, not aggressive, just present. Jackson picked up his coat, draping it over his arm, and took a step back from the chair. The cameras cut to a wide shot, then abruptly to commercial, leaving viewers at home staring at an ad break that felt wildly out of place. As Jackson walked off set, the studio buzzed with whispered disbelief. Crew members avoided eye contact, unsure whether to watch him go or focus on their tasks. The polished calm of morning television had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. And as the lights dimmed and the applause sign flickered uncertainly, it was clear that this wasn't just a tense interview gone wrong, it was a collision between expectation and reality, playing out live before anyone could stop it. The hallway outside the studio felt colder than the set, the hum of backstage machinery replacing the forced cheer of morning television. Samuel L. Jackson walked with measured steps, not hurried, not dragged, his expression composed but resolute. A producer jogged alongside him, murmuring apologies layered with explanations about timing, tone, and misunderstandings. Jackson listened without interrupting, his jaw set, eyes forward. When they reached a quiet corner near the dressing rooms, he finally stopped and turned, his voice low but unwavering as he said he understood television better than most, but understanding didn't mean accepting disrespect. Inside the studio, Michael Strahan remained seated for a moment longer than usual, hands clasped, staring at the space Jackson's chair had occupied seconds earlier. The band eventually played a soft cue, and the show limped back from commercial with practiced smiles and a rushed transition to the next segment. Viewers could sense the shift immediately. The energy was off, brittle, like glass that had already cracked. Strahan carried on, professional to the core, but his eyes betrayed a lingering disbelief. This wasn't how the morning was supposed to go. Backstage, word spread fast. Crew members whispered to one another, replaying the exchange in fragments. Some felt the question had crossed a line, too familiar, too loaded. Others argued it was just part of the job, an unfortunate collision amplified by live television. Phones buzzed as clips began circulating online, short videos stripped of context and reposted with captions that ranged from outrage to triumphant. By the time Jackson reached his car, the moment was already mutating into a narrative larger than the people involved. Jackson sat inside the vehicle for a long moment before the door closed, staring out at the city waking up beyond the studio gates. He exhaled slowly, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a familiar mix of exhaustion and clarity. He'd spent decades navigating spaces that celebrated him one minute and questioned his presence the next. Walking away wasn't new, but doing it live, on a platform built on smiles and soundbites, felt different. Necessary. Meanwhile, producers huddled in a conference room, replaying the footage on a loop. They debated whether to release a statement immediately or wait for the cycle to cool. Words like regret, miscommunication, and valued guest floated around the room, carefully weighed and reshaped. Someone suggested inviting Jackson back for a follow-up conversation. Someone else shook their head, pointing out how quickly that could backfire. The morning show thrived on accessibility, but accessibility had limits, and those limits had just been tested. Strahan retreated to his dressing room once the cameras stopped rolling. He loosened his tie, ran a hand over his face, and replayed the moment in his head, wondering where the pivot should have happened, where he could have softened the landing. He prided himself on connection, on meeting people where they were. Yet here he was, at the center of a storm he hadn't fully anticipated. He drafted a message on his phone, deleted it, then tried again, something private, something honest. Whether he'd ever send it was another question. By midday, the internet had chosen sides. Fans flooded social media with praise for Jackson's refusal to compromise, calling it a masterclass in dignity. Others accused him of overreacting, of turning a routine interview into a spectacle. Think pieces appeared within hours, dissecting tone, race, celebrity, and the unspoken rules of morning television. Every pause, every glance, every clipped second of footage became evidence in a debate that stretched far beyond the studio walls. Jackson spent the afternoon in quiet meetings, his team filtering requests and crafting responses. He declined interviews, uninterested in turning a moment of principle into a promotional tour. When he finally spoke, it was brief and precise. He didn't attack, he didn't grandstand, he reiterated his belief in honest conversation and mutual respect, and left it at that. The restraint surprised some, disappointed others, but it was consistent with the man who'd walked off set without raising his voice. As evening approached, Good Morning America released its statement, carefully balanced and broadly worded. It acknowledged the tension, expressed respect for Jackson's career, and reaffirmed the show's commitment to open dialogue. Strahan's name appeared alongside the network's logo, signaling unity, professionalism, closure. But closure proved elusive. The clip continued to trend, reshared by people who hadn't watched the show in years, each viewing adding another layer of interpretation. Days later, the moment still lingered. Late-night hosts joked about it, careful to stay on the right side of reverence. Media analysts cited it as an example of how live television could no longer contain real conflict without consequence. For Jackson, it became another entry in a long career defined not just by performances, but by choices, by the lines he refused to let others draw for him. Strahan eventually addressed it on air, his tone reflective, measured. He spoke about learning, about listening, about how conversations could miss their mark even with the best intentions. It wasn't an apology so much as an acknowledgement, and for many viewers, that mattered. The studio audience applauded, and this time the applause felt genuine, unprompted. In the end, there was no rematch, no dramatic reconciliation segment, no viral handshake to neatly wrap the story. Just two men returning to their worlds, carrying the weight of a moment that reminded everyone watching that behind the polished desks and bright lights were real people, real histories, and real boundaries. And for all the noise it generated, the exchange left behind a quiet truth that lingered long after the clip stopped playing. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't what you say on camera, but the moment you decide to leave it behind.